My name is Deborah, and I'm a volunteer at the Minnesota State Horticultural Society. If you're not a member of MSHS, now is a good time to join. Members receive not only our award-winning magazine, but also discounts at nurseries and greenhouses, free webinars, and more. Your membership dollars allow us to bring great programming like this to all of you. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. You are attending the webinar today in listen-only mode, so you'll be able to hear our presenter, but we can't hear you. That way there won't be any background noise. If you have questions for our presenter, you can type those in on the panel on the right side of your screen. Go ahead and ask the questions as they arise. Courtney will be answering them after each section and then again at the end. If you do not see the panel, look for an orange arrow in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Click on that arrow and it will pop out the panel. And now, please welcome today's speaker, Courtney Cheetah. Courtney is the Community Outreach Manager here at MSHS. She has over 20 years of experience working in horticulture and food systems education. Courtney spent 16 years as Student Program Coordinator for the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Farm Manager for Cornucopia Student Organic Farm at the University of Minnesota. She has experience growing a wide variety of edible crops, planning and implementing gardens for schools, farms, and food shelf gardens. Take it away, Courtney.
Thanks, Deborah. Okay, we're gonna dive in tonight. We have lots to cover and I'm very excited to be sharing all this info right as the season gets going. So at MSHS, we have some really great core values in building connections between members through events, virtually at this point, but someday soon in person again. Placemaking is another important thing, trying to create spaces that promote happiness and well-being. Education is near and dear to my heart, just trying to get new ideas out to people so that they can be successful. And then cultivating communities. I've been spending all week working with Garden in a Box and Minnesota Green, getting those up and going for the season. So we've got a great season ahead of us. Like Deborah said, a lot of what I have learned comes from my time at Cornucopia Student Organic Farm. We used to grow over 100 different varieties or 100 different fruits and vegetables, some of which I had 95 varieties of tomatoes some years. Just a wealth of knowledge was learned there that I'm excited to share with you today. And so the way that I kind of break this down is thinking about the crop families. We went over this kind of really briefly in the garden planning webinar if you were on that one. But today I'm going to dive deep into each family. And I think that it's really important to think about the families that you're growing and who belongs to which family because of crop rotations. And ideally, like crop rotations are two plants that follow each other sequentially, either within the same season or from season to season. And so it's important that they be different botanically and that they don't make the same demands on the soil for nutrients. And typically they don't share the same diseases or insect pests. And so plants that you'll see as we go through this, plants that are in the same families often do all those things. And so it's really important that you mix and match up your plants from year to year within the season so that you have good crop rotation going, just to minimize those pest problems and disease problems and nutrient problems that can arise. The rotation that I always went with was I'm just not going to plant the same crop from the same family back to back in the same season or from year to year. And that way it's just really easy to do that. So we're going to jump into our first crop family, which is the allium family. This is all of your vegetable crops are things like onions, scallions, leeks, shallots, garlic, and then a couple herbs. The chives and the garlic chives also belong to this family. So onions are really great. They're really nice and easy. They're really great and easy to transplant or to start from seed. If you want to start from seed, you probably want to start them a little bit sooner than right now. Scallions are the one exception to that. But right now is the perfect time to get sets. So getting some sets from your local garden center or hardware store Those can be planted out. Typically, if I was planting them from seed, I would put maybe like 5 seeds in a cell. They don't take very much space. They kind of start out really spindly little monocot, one-leafed little seedlings. And then I would transplant those out, putting them out, 3 to 6 inches apart, or even in a cluster of 4 or 5 together, a foot apart. And then that'll fill in pretty nicely. Shallots are another one that I really like. They are really nice and mild. They have a nice kind of garlicky flavor. They can be grown from sets or seeds. In fact, actually, I think they can actually be really perennialized in our climate here, where if you have a patch of shallots, you could easily let it go from year to year. It'll flower and produce more seeds. And you can kind of, as the seeds are ripe and ready, you can kind of pull out the shallot and kind of shake the seeds into the bed to plant the next year's shallot crop. So that's something to think about with shallots. The seeds can be a little bit expensive. Sometimes it's better to just go with sets. The seeds can also be kind of hard to find, so that's something to think about. Scallions and green onions, these are definitely time to plant these now from seed. I actually like to plant those in groups of 10 or 12 seeds at a time in little bunches, and then I actually harvest them as bunches. A lot of times you see them in the grocery store as bunches, and they just don't get very big. And so it's easy to just, grow them as a bunch. I always used to do them in bunches with like 9 inches between the spacing wise. And they are fast enough for succession. So you can replant these every, 3-4 weeks throughout the growing season and get a continuous crop of them, which is really kind of fun. Leeks are another one that you want to start early from seed or get transplants. I always found that what worked best is to put them kind of in a single row where they're about 3 inches apart within the row. And they really require to be hilled just like a potato would. In order to get that long white stem, you need to bury that. So what I would do is I would dig a trench and I would plant the leeks at the bottom of the trench. And then when they were, a foot tall, I would go through and kind of knock the soil on one side of the trench into the trench, and then I'd let them grow up another foot, and then I'd knock the other side into the trench as well, or kind of up mounded against the plants, so to get that long white neck of the leek to really get it to be robust. And these you typically harvest in the fall. They just take a while to get really big and robust and beautiful, but they can be really easy to grow. Garlic's the one that you actually plant in the fall. So you break apart the bulb, plant each individual clove, and it'll actually turn into another bulb, just like that. Typically you mulch those with straw. My favorite thing about garlic is that you actually get 2 crops. You get the bulb, but then you also get the scape. The scape is usually right around beginning of June is when it pops up, and it is that kind of curlicue flower bud. If you can get it at the 2 loop stage, that's like the prime stage, it'll start to straighten out and get kind of woody after that. It kind of has like a garlic flavored green bean texture to it. That's really awesome. And you can use that scape anywhere that you would normally use other garlic, minced garlic or whatever, the same way. Garlic, after you've harvested it, usually you harvest it, I want to say like middle of July, beginning of August. You harvest it when the tips of the leaves start to turn brown. And then you wanted to cure it for about 3 weeks. So you want to put it in a warm, dry spot for about 3 weeks and just let it kind of hang out. And that'll cure it, and then it'll keep all winter long, which is great. Green garlic, so if you miss one of those scapes, oftentimes what happens is you miss one, and then when you go to harvest the garlic, you've got this funky flower bud with little baby seeds in it. You can actually plant those little baby seeds too and get green garlic. They will take 7 or 8 years before they'll turn into a bulb, but if you just let them produce a little tiny spindly, baby bulb, you can harvest that and use that as well. Oops, not too far. Chives and garlic chives, these are perennial. They're usually one of the first crops that you can harvest in the season. The garden chives are the purple one, and the garlic chives are the white flowered plant there. And they are also really easy to save seed from. You can also stagger the cuttings for a continuous harvest. So if you harvest a little bit now and then wait 2-3 weeks and come back and harvest more, or even harvest a little bit each each week, it'll actually stagger it'll continue to produce more and more leaves that you can harvest. Oftentimes after it's flowered, the stem gets kind of woody and not as palatable. At that point, it's a good idea to just cut back the whole plant and then let it resprout again, and then you can continue harvesting in that. So just a quick overview of this family. A lot of times you can start them from seed. The garlic, shallots, and onions can all be from sets. They're all fairly cold tolerant. If you've got these outside right now, I wouldn't even worry about them with this cold weather that we're having the next couple days. They will be just fine. You want to cure the onions, shallots, and garlic. Chives and the garlic can be kind of perennial. The shallots, I guess, too. They're all pretty much light feeders. They can be mulched with straw, and they all do really well on the polypropylene fabric, the landscaping fabric. Just to show you a picture of that. This is polypropylene landscaping fabric. It can last like 5 to 10 years. A lot of times what I did is I had chunks of it that I had holes pre-cut, and then I would just move them around, the chunks of fabric to plant into. It really minimizes weeding with onions and shallots, especially. Like, they're just not very weed competitive. So if you can find a way to get ahead of those weeds by using a weed block, that's going to be a really good thing. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like. So here's a bed of onions that were planted in the weed block. You can see I've got clover in the pathways, but there's almost no weeds in there. Versus the one year that I thought, oh yeah, I can just plant these out straight and they'll be fine. No, they were in a mess and you couldn't find them. They really, really are hard to control the weeds in. So you want to keep an eye on that and be pretty diligent. Deborah, are there any questions on alliums before I move to the next thing?
Oh, there most certainly are. The first question is from Michelle, who wants to know, if shallots can seed themselves, how do you rotate them?
So what I kind of did was, when you pull them up, have the next spot that you want them ready, and you kind of shake the seeds over into that next spot. Is kind of what I would do. But if they're perennial, you could also just have, like, here's my shallot patch, and until I have a problem with them, grow them there, and they'll be fine. That's one of the nice things about this whole family, is that there aren't a lot of diseases or pests on the onions. There's a few, but they're pretty minimal and few and far between.
Okay. Bobby says, I have not been able to find leeks for transplanting. Do you have any advice?
Boy, I have not been out and about, so I don't know what's out there. I would just keep an eye out. You could still try to start them from seed. They're just not going to get as big at this point if you can find the seeds too. And you know, if one thing to do would be to, you know, if you've got neighbors that have gardens, ask them. A lot of times gardeners want to share their wealth and abundance. So maybe a neighbor has some that they can find.
Yeah, if anybody wants chives for anything, just let me know.
There you go.
Cassandra has said, I found some leeks at Malborg's in Rogers. So there you
Perfect.
go.
Thank you.
Malborg? I think that's how you say it. Thank you, Cassandra. And since you asked, garlic chives are the ones with the white flowers? Yes.
Yep.
Okay, we have Anita says, I have scallions that I didn't harvest last year, and they've come up again this spring. What do I do? Do I let them grow? Do I pull them all up now?
You can harvest them whenever you want to have some scallions. That's the lovely part about it. A lot of these alliums are kind of perennial in our climate, and they will come back. I always like forget one or two garlic, and then they come out the next year, and I harvest it for green garlic. So yeah, you have lots of options.
Okay, and Sandy reminds everybody that the chive flowers are edible, and
Yes.
I second this. They're delicious.
Definitely.
You can also, if you're overrun with blossoms, you can pick all the blossoms, give them a rinse, and put them in vinegar. And you can make chive blossom vinegar. It's a flavored vinegar.
Awesome.
Yeah, I found 3 bottles of it that I forgot I made. I'm sorry if I don't say the name right. Ellerine, I think. I'm sorry. Asks about fertilizer for onions?
Honestly, a really minimal light, they're not heavy feeders, so unless you have really, really depleted soil, they're probably not going to need much. Adding a little bit of compost is probably more than enough.
Okay. Lucy wants to know if chives will reflower if they're cut back after their first flowering.
Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. And sometimes if you cut them before they flower, you can kind of stagger the flowering as well.
Lisa wants to know, how are garlics perennials?
Well, they're perennial in that they'll just keep growing if you leave them in the ground and you don't harvest them. So you have to, harvest. If you miss one, then it'll come back. It's not gonna they don't usually die out over the winter if they're left in the soil. So they're hardy enough. They actually like that. They need that cold spell over the winter to actually acclimate. They'll put down a bunch of roots in the fall, and then as soon as it starts, getting warm enough, they're up and going early in the springtime. So, yeah.
Okay, and Senshi wants to know, do scallions overwinter?
They can, yep. Okay, I'm gonna
Okay.
keep moving here. And
That's
with
actually all of our allium
questions.
questions, so moving
Excellent.
on.
Yeah. Brassicas are the next family that we're going to talk about. This is the Brassiaceae or the mustard family. And these are a lot of your like standard veggie crops that you think of. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kohlrabi, radishes, rutabagas, turnips, and then a lot of greens like arugula and collards, kale, mustard greens, and Asian greens. And there's one little flower, the sweet alyssum, that's also in the same family. These are typically cool season crops. They are moderate to light feeders. So again, they don't need much more than a little bit of compost at the beginning of the season. Transplants are often mulched. They can be planted in successions as well. A lot of them are quick enough to get more than one crop per season. They are susceptible to flea beetles, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and the cabbage loopers as well. Broccoli, cauliflower, and Romanesco. These are all kind of very similar in how they grow. If you don't know Romanesco, it's one of my favorites. It's that green, fractally, goofy-looking vegetable there. It just has this really delicious, nutty flavor when it's roasted. These ones, the trick with them, I think, is to really not let them get too root bound. Cauliflower is probably the hardest thing that I've ever grown. The trick that I found with cauliflower is to actually start the seeds around June 1st, transplant them into the garden July 1st, and then you get a really nice fall crop. The same is kind of true with Romanesco. That one, if you plant it too early, it just seems to grow and grow and grow and never get that nice head. Broccoli is a lot more forgiving. Broccoli will make that nice head, and then it will, you can harvest that, and then oftentimes you'll get side shoots that you can continue to harvest throughout the season, which are really nice too. Next up is the cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi. Again, these are all really easy to grow. Cabbages are very cold tolerant. Actually, they all kind of are. Brussels sprouts are really best harvested in the fall after a frost. Kohlrabi is really a quick crop that you can get multiple harvests throughout the season if you continuously kind of plant it maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks. Brussels sprouts are the one of these three that are more tricky. Oftentimes what happens is that you don't get nice big Brussels at the end of the season. And the trick is to take off that top. So the little mini cabbage that's on the top of the plant, it's often, I've heard it be called the Brussellini. If you actually remove that around Labor Day, then usually 2 or 3 weeks after that, all of those Brussels are gonna like puff up and get big and nice, kind of all evenly. If you don't do that, if you leave that there, they're gonna ripen much slower. The ones at the base will ripen first, and then they'll kind of slowly move up the stalk. Versus if you take off that apical meristem, the growing tip at the top, it signals to all those Brussels to kind of size up at the same time, and you get a better harvest for that. This is another one, kalettes, which are also called like kale sprouts and flower sprouts. These are available from Johnny's, and they're kind of like a cross between a Brussels sprout and kale, like a frilly Brussels sprout. They have a really good like nutty flavor. I saw these at Trader Joe's a couple years ago and bought a package and kind of fell in love with them and have been growing them on and off ever since. They grow similar to Brussels sprouts. Again, you want to kind of remove that apical meristem, the top part of it, to get those to all kind of size up. The bonus of this one, though, if you grow it, is that it has like, the leaves are like big leaves of kale. And so you can harvest those at the end of the season too and get like kind of 2 crops in one, which is kind of nice. Kale and collards, these are super easy. You can transplant them or you can direct seed them. If you're going for the baby kale, you're gonna have to plant that multiple times because you're harvesting kind of usually the whole plant, but you can basically harvest it once or harvest it all season long after you planted it once. A lot of times at the end of the season, like my kale plants, they look like little baby palm trees because you've got like this stalk with like just the leaves at the top, a bare underneath or on top of the bare stem, and they're kind of fun that way. Arugula, mustard greens, Asian greens, these are all pretty easy to direct seed or transplant. They're pretty easy to grow. You want to make sure that the varieties are what you want. Sometimes they can be a little bit on the spicy side. And these are ones that the flea beetles tend to really like. So flea beetles are these little tiny black shiny bugs that really like brassica family crops. They take little bites out of the leaves and they give you that kind of dimpled effect that you see there. What I've found to be most effective is to cover them with row cover. Arugula and radishes seem to be the most susceptible. So, literally seeding those crops and then putting the row cover over them is the best way to kind of keep them out. They tend to overwinter in the soil. So again, that crop rotation is really important. So if you had a bad infestation of flea beetles last year, you're going to make sure to move your crops, anything in this brassica family, away from that spot this year, so that you don't attract them and create an all-you-can-eat buffet for them. The row cover is kind of like a Rime or Agribond are the 2 brands that are often out there. I know that like Mother Earth's Gardens and Eggplant Urban Farm Supply both carry the row cover, and so they're good sources for that. You can also find it online a lot of times. And I would say with the flea beetles, like all of the crops in this family can be susceptible to them, but they seem to go for the arugula and the radishes first. That's what they seem to like best. Radishes, rutabagas, turnips, these can all be direct seeded. Radishes can split when you have like big influxes of moisture. So if it rains a whole bunch, you might have split radishes afterwards. So it's a good idea if it's going to rain and you've got radishes that are almost harvestable, maybe go out and harvest them just to try to prevent that. Turnips and rutabagas can actually be transplanted. So I kind of discovered this by accident. But you can start them and then transplant them out and they'll grow great. Turnips, I think, sometimes get a bad rap, so I would suggest if you're not a huge turnip fan, trying some salad turnips. Those are those white ones at the top there. And they just have like such a lovely, like the skin has a little bit of a radishy bite to it. And the inside has this like creamy cabbagey texture. So if you want the bite, you can leave the skin on. If not, peel it off. They're really great grilled, believe it or not. And you can eat them raw too, which, a lot of times turnips, you want to wait till it's fall or winter to eat those in hearty soups and things. But the salad turnips are definitely like a new up and coming crop that you should definitely give a try. Questions on brassica family?
Yes. Anita asks if you have any experience with growing baby bok choy or toi choy. Does it do well in 4B?
It does. It grows great. It can be susceptible to those flea beetles again. Definitely. But they grow great here.
Okay, and Anne, who does a lot of brassicas apparently, she says, my cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi do great, but I have trouble with radishes. They grow great tops, but there's no bulb. What am I doing wrong?
Excellent. So radishes, the trick with them is they are really easy to adapt to your microclimate. So if they grow and they don't produce nice roots, what you should do is let them grow, let them make a flower, let them make a seed, and then collect those seeds and then plant those seeds either, a week or 2 later or later in the season or even the next season. And then they are adapted to your microclimate and they will grow the perfect radishes for you. So don't give up on You just need to sort of, grow those seeds out and they will do better. Sometimes there's also like seasonality with radishes. I know watermelon radishes do much better in the fall than they do in the springtime. So if it's that one, make sure to grow it in the fall rather than the spring. But most of the other ones they'll adapt and then grow really well if you just grab the seeds from them.
Okay, both Yvonne and Donna want to know about green worms on kale and broccoli. Do they just have to pick them off every day, or what do you do about these things?
So this family is definitely the host to all of those cabbage loopers, the diamondback moths. There's just a whole slew of them. My biggest tactic is to plant cilantro and dill nearby and let it go to flower, and that will attract a lot of parasitic wasps. They're teeny, teeny, tiny little bugs. They're not like a big wasp that's gonna ever sting you, but it will actually lay its eggs in the eggs of those pests and kind of take care of them for you. If you see a bunch out there, yeah, I think it's a good idea to pull them off. There's other things like neem that you could spray on them, but I think it's better to just create the beneficial insect habitat for the good guys, and then they'll take care of them for you.
Okay, next question. Marty wants to know, where do I find the seeds on radishes?
Oh, so they actually make these little pods. They make like radish pods. The flowers will turn into these pods, and then the seeds will be inside the pod.
Okay. Kathy wants to know if Brussels sprouts are prone to any worms or anybody else.
I think that the leaves can get attacked by the caterpillars, and the flea beetles, but honestly, they're so like hardy and big that the Brussels themselves are almost kind of invincible because they are harvested so late in the season.
Jennifer wants to know, Jennifer had the similar problem with no root, just radish tops, and wants to know, how do you know when the radishes are ready to harvest?
I usually kind of like look down at the base, and when they're starting to pop up, you can kind of usually tell by the top of the radish how big around they're gonna be, and then you just pull one or two and just see and test it out.
Okay. And both Senchu and Christine are asking, how close do you plant cilantro and dill to your other crop to prevent the caterpillars? And do you just write off the herbs as a sacrificial plant, or can you still use them?
Oh yeah, you can still harvest them when they're young, but when they get to the point where you're kind of like not gonna harvest them anymore when they start to flower is typically, I mean the dill, even with the flowers, you could harvest that for the flowers and the seed heads when you're pickling. With the cilantro, by the time they flower, they usually get kind of bitter. So you're not gonna harvest it for cilantro, but you can definitely let the cilantro flowers turn into coriander and then harvest them too. And I would say spacing wise, boy, within, let's say 10 feet. If you've got those plants within 10 feet of your other plants, those good insects will find the pests for you.
Okay, and Kathy says that her Brussels sprouts only grow to the size of dimes. How do you get bigger ones? Is it that the growing season is too short?
Nope, it's that you probably haven't removed that top. And when you remove that top, that'll trigger for all of them to size up and be nice and big.
Okay, and are brassicas going to be safe from this upcoming cold spell?
I think so. Our soils are warm enough that they're going to create kind of an insulating layer for the underground root part, and the top of it, those plants are hardy. Like I've had I've had a bunch of winter sown containers outside that have had sprouted kale and cabbage and a bunch of these family members in there that have been snowed on, and the last snow that we got, they all got snowed on and they've all been just fine. So they will be okay.
And what was the name of the row cover again?
Remay or Agribond. So REMAY or AGRIBON. Okay, we'll keep moving here. The composite family is next. These are also Asteraceae is the Latin name for these. And these are a lot of greens. So lettuce, endive, radicchio, chicory, artichokes, and then a lot of the flowers that we grow are in this family. These are typically moderate feeders. Typically with the greens, you don't really want to mulch them because they can make it trickier to harvest them. The flowers can be mulched. Lettuce, there's a lot of diversity in lettuce. It can be direct seeded or it can be transplanted. They're usually really quick growing. I like to, plant it practically every 2 or 3 weeks throughout the growing season, just so I can have a continuous harvest of it. There are a lot of leaf lettuce varieties that are out there. There's, again, a ton of diversity in those. These are typically ones that you kind of scatter the seeds across your soil and then let them sprout up, and then you can cut them. Usually you can get 2 or 3 cuttings before they start to get real bitter. For leaf lettuce, I actually prefer head lettuce types, romaine or some of the butter crunch or head lettuce types where you harvest the whole head. And then it's kind of one and done, and you don't have to worry about the weeds. With those leaf lettuces, they can be really challenging to harvest if you've got any kind of weed pressure in them, versus head lettuce is a lot easier to, avoid the weeds when you're harvesting it. I do usually about, 6 to 12 inch spacing for those, and they're super easy to harvest. Endive, radicchio, chicory, these are all kind of specialty greens. The endive that we see, that kind of Belgian endive, they actually harvest that and they let it grow for a year, cut it back, and then put it in caves to have it resprout, and that's how it gets that sort of bleached white. So keep that in mind if you're trying to get that effect, that might be a challenge. The frisee and curly types can be kind of quick to rot and bolt, so you want to make sure that you're growing those with kind of good air circulation and keeping an eye on those. Dandelions are also in this family, and right now, man, is the time to go out there. Before they flower, they're usually not as bitter as after they flower, and I actually love the flowers of dandelions for making dandelion jam. So look that up. You can Google that if you're interested in trying that. Dandelions, they're just so important. Like, they're the breakfast, lunch, and dinner for all of our pollinators right now. There's not much else out there blooming. So I like to be an advocate for dandelions and let them grow. Artichokes, they're in this family. Artichokes are they're fun to grow, but they're kind of a challenge. They get really big. They almost need like a 4 foot by 4 foot area to really spread to their full max. To get them to produce flowers, they're actually biennial. And so you actually have to have a plant that thinks it's 2 years old to get it to produce those flowers. And I've tried a bunch of different things. I've planted them, in February, and then moved them outside in April for a couple weeks when it's still kind of cold. I've put them in a cooler for 3 weeks to try that. One of the best ways that I've gotten them to really flower robustly is to actually let them grow for a season, dig them up, put them kind of in a cool, dark spot, root celery kind of conditions, and then pot them back up again come spring and plant them back outside again. A lot of times they'll produce, one nice big one. The side flower buds will also get nice and big if you let them. A lot of times if you look at like the Johnny's catalog, it'll say like, produces one nice one and then, a couple of smaller ones. But I've actually had them produce dozens of the flower buds, which is kind of really cool and exciting. It's one that, is definitely brag worthy if you can get it to grow and produce a bunch. Salsify and Scorzona, these are kind of goofy root crops that are in this composite family. They have kind of an oystery flavor. They have a little bit, they grow a little bit like carrots in terms of like having a long germination time, and having the moisture pretty consistent is really important with these two. Edible flowers are also in this family. Bachelor buttons, calendula, chamomile, marigolds, there's a whole bunch of them. Of all those, probably my favorite are the calendula and the bachelor buttons, and you want to kind of use the petals and not the stemmy parts, because the stemmy parts aren't as tasty. There's also a lot of insectary and cut flowers in this family, so cosmos, sunflowers, zinnias. And these can all be really great for pollinators and good insects in your garden. Deborah, are there any questions? This is kind of a quick family.
Yes. First, my favorite one is from Jennifer, who says, if I'd like to try dandelion greens, what's the best way to wash them? Because there are dogs in my neighborhood.
Yeah, you probably want to, um, not do them from like the corner edge of the lawn, but take them from the inside where they probably haven't had, dogs on top of them. I would wash them just like I would wash a lettuce, in kind of a salad spinner, dunk it in a whole bunch of water, swish it around, and then kind of spin it dry. That's going to be the easiest, or, let it sit in a colander and kind of drip out the excess moisture.
Okay. Jennifer also wants to know, how often do you need to rotate placement of lettuces? Can you keep replanting in the same area?
You probably can once or twice. I wouldn't do it more than that. Lettuce isn't one that has a ton of insect pests that are really bad. Unless aphids, I guess, are probably one of the few things that you really notice in them. But it's just a good practice to rotate when you can. So maybe, have a radish patch that you can rotate with your lettuce greens or something like that.
Mallory wants to know, do you need to thin leaf lettuce once the seeds sprout, or are they best sown in bunches?
Yeah, I think they're best kind of sown in clumps, or just kind of evenly broadcast across the soil so they all sprout up, and then they're easier to harvest that way.
Okay. Georgia wants to know, will lettuce and endive grow in a partly shady area with 4 to 6 hours of sun?
Definitely. I've had great lettuce crops in kind of a partial shade conditions.
And she wants to know what other veggies would grow there.
She should go back to the garden planning webinar that I did a couple weeks ago because I have a whole slide towards the beginning of that on shade crops. But a lot of the root crops, radishes, turnips, kohlrabi, broccoli, peas will grow good in partial shade. There's a whole list of them. Yeah.
Lucy wants to know, can you start lettuce indoors?
Yes, of course. You can start most things indoors. The only things that you can't really start indoors, or that it's not worth it to start indoors, in my book, are peas, beans, radishes, corn, almost everything else. Carrots, you want to direct seed those, but almost everything else you can start inside and transplant if you want to, and you have the room to.
Okay. Let's see. Erica wants to know if you have any tips for cosmos.
For cosmos, they should be pretty easy to grow. Plant them and watch them grow. I've never done anything special with them. Okay, ready to move on?
We can come back to the rest.
Okay, let's come back to the rest. We're going to talk about the cucurbit family next. So these are kind of your vining crops, so cucumbers, your melons, your squashes. These all have that kind of vining habit. They need to be in, they need really room to sprawl. Like one of my favorite stories is like the first year when we were growing, we planted, a bunch of squash in like a 4-foot wide bed, and it like literally just laughed at us and went 8 feet in every direction. They just really they need to sprawl, they need space. You need to give them, a bunch of room because that's what they're going to take up. These are warm season crops, so I would wait until June 1st at least the end of May, beginning of June before I plant them outside. They can be mulched. They work well on that polypropylene landscaping fabric, just like the onions. These are more heavy feeders, so they probably want, a little bit of fertilizer or some compost, definitely compost added with them. They are susceptible to powdery mildew, and that just seems to sort of be like a fact of life in Minnesota. Like we have hot, humid Augusts, and it's the perfect conditions for powdery mildew. If you get powdery mildew in June, I would worry about it. If it's in August when it just happens, I wouldn't really worry about it. By then you're usually sick of zucchini anyway. Usually by then your squashes have set and they're not it's going to make it easier to harvest them, honestly, if you let the powdery mildew kind of have its way. These are also susceptible to squash bugs, squash borers, and cucumber beetles. And I'm not going to go into too much detail there. I'm going to do a pest webinar coming up later this season. So check that out if you want the nitty-gritty on those. Cucumbers, they have, the spines or spineless, so you have that option. There are also, pickling cucumbers versus English cucumbers versus the kind of American cucumbers. So you have lots of different options in terms of what kind you want to grow and what sizes you want them to get to. There's some really cool Asian cucumbers out there that have kind of like the texture of a dragon tail. These can be trellised. A lot of times they don't need to be. They'll kind of sprawl on the ground just fine. They can be easier to find when you're harvesting them when they're trellised. When I'm going to harvest them, a lot of times I kind of like to pick up the vines, and you can feel the weight of the cucumber hanging off to help you find them. They can be planted in successions. You could plant a couple different plantings of them. Honestly, one is usually enough. They'll usually go for quite a long time throughout the season. Melons, they're another easy one to grow. They can be trellised if it's a smaller variety. I find that the trickiest part with melons is oftentimes figuring out when to harvest them. Muskmelons, you can kind of look at the nets, and the color on the underside of the net will turn more yellow. Looking for slipping vines or slipping varieties is also another good trick. If on the seed package it says it's a variety that slips, that means that when you tug on it on the vine, if it just falls off, then you know it's ripe. You can oftentimes smell the blossom end. That'll have a really good aroma. For honeydews, the skin will change from kind of hairy to waxy when it's ripe. With watermelons, there's the thump test. If you have that ability to thump it and hear when it has that kind of more hollowy sound that it's ripe. My trick is usually to look at where it attaches to the stem. The watermelons, they attach to the stem at this point where there's usually two little curly Q tendrils. And when those tendrils have turned brown, that's when I know that watermelon is most likely ripe. You can also kind of turn it over and see if there's a yellow resting spot on the ground, and that's another good sign when that changes color. You have to be careful if you turn them often though, because if you don't put it back, you can undo that cheat. Yeah, and you also want to think about size. There are lots of refrigerator box melons that are awesome. I love the Minnesota midget musk melons. Those are a nice small little pocket kind of size melon, single serving. They can also be really, really big varieties too. But just thinking about the sizes of them is kind of fun. Summer squash and zucchini. These can be direct seeded or transplanted. If you're going to transplant any of these crops, I would probably, start them in a week or two, end of May-ish, and let them grow for a week, maybe 2 weeks tops, and then transplant them out into your garden after they've just got maybe one set of true leaves. They have these big kind of paddle-shaped cotyledons, and then they'll start to get their true leaves. You don't want them to be real big in the garden. They don't like to have their roots touched much, so I oftentimes will dig the hole, have it all ready to go, and then kind of just pull the pot off from the stem, pull up on the stem, and not really touch the roots at all, and just mound the soil around them. Summer squash and zucchini can, you could harvest those 2 to 5 times a week depending on what size you're going for. The zucchini especially can get really big really fast. When you get sick of these, thinking about eating those edible squash flowers is a good idea. The male flowers will have a stem. The female flowers that are going to turn into those fruits are going to not have a stem. So if you want to cut back on the amount of fruits you're getting, you could just harvest the male flowers. Again, these can kind of sprawl and take up space. They work really good on the landscaping fabric. And there do tend to be bush varieties of these too that you can look for that'll be a little bit more compact for small garden spaces. Winter squash, there's just tons of diversity in terms of what's out there for winter squash. So, thinking about, do you want big ones? Do you want little ones? These can be direct seeded or transplanted, just like the zucchini. They can be thick or thin skinned two. So like the delicata squashes, which is that top one in the right corner, that one has a thinner skin, so it's not going to, even if you try to cure it, it's not going to last as late into the season over the winter. Versus like a butternut, if you cure that, that's going to sit there on the shelf for, gosh, I think I still have some butternut squash sitting on my shelf from last year. I'm a really big fan of, so you can see those kind of big pink ones. That's like a really awesome pink banana squash that's really delicious. There's one that's the Georgia Sweet Keeper, I think. That's a really, really nice one. So there's big, giant Blue Hubbard ones. There's little teeny tiny ones. They all have their place. So just, consider all those different varieties. This is my, I bet you never heard of this one before. This is a jelly melon. It's in this family as well. This is kind of my fun factoid. Like if you ever watch any sci-fi movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, they always have, when they show the food, they always have a jelly melon on the table. They have kind of a gelatinous gooey green inside. When they're ripe, they turn more kind of like a bright yellow. This is the beginning of Avengers Endgame. Thanos is picking jelly melons, so there's your fun fact. And you can grow these here in Minnesota. They do tend to have a long season that they need. A lot of times right before the frost, I go out and harvest a bunch of them and then let them sit on my counter for another month before they're really getting ripe. They do have a banana lime cucumber flavor. What do you do with them? I'm still trying to figure that out other than just eat them for fun. The whole plant is covered in spikes. The seeds, or not the seeds, but the stems, the leaves, the fruits, the whole thing is covered in spikes. So this can be sort of a good plant to sort of put on the edge of plantings where you have a lot of people trying to come into your garden and you're trying to deter them. You can deter them with jelly melons. Okay, Deborah, any questions on cucurbits?
Oh my gosh, so many questions. The first one is going to be from Karen, who asked this at the very, very beginning of the webinar. She said, I have a growing spot that's very close to the brick foundation of our home. Can I use it for plants such as squash? Or would growing it in a large pot be better?
I mean, it's going to need space. It's going to sprawl, but you could definitely put a bushy type something in there. That would work great. It's going to like that heat. So a lot of the cucurbit crops like heat.
Okay. Ellerine, I'm sorry again if I'm massacring your name. What's your favorite trellis for cucumbers?
Boy, I've used like plastic mesh trellis. I've used kind of like rebar mesh or like a metal frame. I think I prefer the metal frame better, just because it's sturdier, but it doesn't really take much. I mean, I've grown them up and over pallets. I've grown them, you kind of have to train them to go up or to start climbing up. They're not going to just go up by themselves like some things will. But yeah.
Jennifer wants to know, can you plant cucumbers and peas together? Or what are compatible to grow at in the same spot? She's using garden circles, which is a type of raised bed.
Right. Yeah, you could do them together. The peas are going to take off early. You could plant them probably a month and a half before you're going to plant the cucumbers. And so the cucumbers are just going to be kind of getting started while the peas are in their prime. And then as the peas start to die back, the cucumbers will take over. So yeah, I would think that would work great.
Do cantaloupes ripen more after being picked?
In my experience, not much. Like I think that unless you've got like ethylene that you can douse them with like they do on trucks, you're better off waiting until the like vine ripened in my book. Plus they just taste so much better.
So does putting them in the brown paper bag with the banana work, or?
I have not tested that very often. If someone else wants to chime in on that, yeah. I like to just wait.
We will await that answer.
Sounds good.
Have you tried any of the Asian squashes?
I've tried a lot of squashes. I'm not sure if I've tried any of the Asian ones or not.
Yeah. What was the next? When you use landscaping fabric, do you have to water more often?
No, it's water permeable. So if if it rains, you will be just fine in terms of having them yeah, if it rains, it'll just go right through it.
Okay. Is patty pan squash winter or summer squash?
That's a summer squash.
Okay. Yeah, I got that one right. Nita wants to know, how do you cure winter squash?
You usually just like cut it off the vine and let it sit for maybe, I like to actually let it sit out in the garden for a couple of days, because oftentimes there's sort of sap in the stems that if you harvest it and put it in boxes or something, that sap will make everything sticky. So I like to just kind of let it sit there and drain, and then it will kind of, you just like put it similar to the garlic, where you want it in kind of a warm, dry spot to let it just sit for a week or 2 or 3, and that'll kind of cure it so that it hardens that skin up.
Is horned melon the same as jelly melon?
Yes, it has like horned melon or kiwanu or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Squash and melons, are they susceptible to deer and rabbits?
In my experience, not really, but I don't have a ton of experience with the deer being an issue. We just don't have very many deer where I'm at, but rabbits typically like a lot of other things better than those.
Well, I learned a long time ago to never say a rabbit doesn't eat anything in particular, because there's always one rabbit who will.
Gotcha.
But I mean, that's because they ate my chives. I have very
Right.
strange rabbits, apparently.
Yep.
Kathy has a pumpkin question. When you're growing them, how many blossoms should you leave on the vine, and when would you take off the blossoms?
So if you're growing like giant state fair pumpkins, you might want to like only have one blossom and one, on the vine. If you only have a limited area for them to grow, you might want to, take off a couple of the blossoms. But otherwise, if you've got a big space that they can grow and sprout, I would just let them all go, and you'll get as many pumpkins as you can.
Okay, I'm looking at the time and I'm going to say let's
Yeah.
keep going, and we'll get back to the everyone. We will stay on for longer after the official time is over if you want to stick around if we didn't get to your question or you want to listen to the other questions.
Perfect. Thanks. So the goosefoot family is next. These are beets, chard, and spinach. They're a quick family. They can be direct seeded or transplanted. They can be planted in succession, so you can plant them multiple times throughout the season, especially the beets, I would say. Chard, you don't necessarily need to. You can plant it once and harvest it all season long. Spinach has a little bit more trickiness, so I'll talk about in just one second. These are all cool tolerant, so if they've popped up in your garden, they'll be just fine through this frost or potential frost that we're having, and they're moderate to light feeders. Spinach is the one where, so it can bolt, and bolting is the process by which it produces a flower stem and tries to go to seed on you. And that's triggered by day length. And it's when we get more than 14 hours of sunlight that it will start to bolt. And that usually happens kind of end of May, like May 25th-ish, and through middle of August. And so you want to either plant it early and get an early crop of it, or you want to wait till after kind of it starts to cool down in end of September or end of August into September to plant a fall planting of it. And that's kind of the windows that we can really grow good spinach. You could try planting it in the shade. You might be able to trick it that way, but a lot of times it's actually that day length that triggers it. It can also be heat, but day length is kind of the killer for it for us. Chard, this can be direct seeded or transplanted. We can grow lots of different rainbow varieties of it, which are really fun. And they can be mulched. And again, you're just basically harvesting the biggest leaf from the base and letting the smaller leaves grow as it goes. Beets, again, pretty easy to direct seed or transplant. My favorite thing about beets is when you harvest them, they make this noise when you pull them out of the ground. That's just super satisfying. I also like growing them in all the different colors. So there's red ones, there's gold ones, there's the white and red, which are the Chioggia candy striped ones, and then there are actually white ones as well. And I like to have them in a big bunch together. They just look so pretty. or on the plate as well. There's also some fun like goosefoot cousins that are out there, like epazote, which is an herb that's often used in Latin cooking and is cooked with beans to like make them less gassy. Quinoa is also in this family, which is kind of another fun goosefoot. And then they actually have some edible weeds like pigweed and lamb's quarter. If you see these in your garden, usually, about the same time that you're thinning the beets, you're also finding little seedlings of lamb's quarter and pigweed. When they're at the 2 sizes in the middle of the screen, that's the time to harvest them and eat them and add them into your salad. I've been served like wild spinach that was really just lamb's quarter at like a fancy restaurant in New York City. But if once they get big, you want to get them out of there because they'll produce tons and tons of weed seeds in your garden, and that's no good. I'm going to keep going since we're kind of running out of time here. Legumes, these are your beans, edamame, peas, peanuts, and a lot of cover crops in this family. These are usually direct seeded. They can be planted in succession. These are heavy givers, so they'll actually add nitrogen to your soil if you add inoculant, and they can be mulched if you want to. This is the inoculant, so it's a black powder that you oftentimes you can sort of add it to your seeds in a number of different ways. You can get your seeds wet and kind of roll them around in the black powder and then plant them. You can mix the black powder with water till it's like consistency of runny yogurt and dredge your seeds through there to have them be inoculated. And the inoculant really creates this like puts the mycorrhizae that the roots need to create the conditions for it to pull nitrogen out of the air and bring it down into the plant and into the roots. You can see the nodules there are those little white bumps. If you cut those open and they're kind of pink on the inside, you know that the inoculant worked and that they were fixing nitrogen. So that's a cool party trick too. Peas, these are cool season. They can be direct seeded. They are, you can grow them pea shoots really quick, within like 2 weeks. And that's usually just the tips of the pea plants that are like 4 to 6 inches tall. So sometimes, if I'm growing a pea patch, I'll nip off those little tips of the pea plants and throw those in salads or make pesto or all kinds of fun things with those. I like to grow peas and spinach together. A lot of times I'm growing the peas along a trellis and I've got kind of the space next to the peas that's empty, and spinach is a good one. They both get planted really early in the season and then it can just fill in along next to it, which is nice. Beans, there's so much diversity in beans. There's green beans, there's wax beans, there's purple beans, there's dry beans. They're all pretty much warm seasons, so you want to wait till June 1st to plant those. The peas you can plant early, but the beans usually want a warmer soil to really grow well. Dry beans, there's so much diversity in dry beans. I would highly recommend putting a few of these plants in your garden. They're super fun to save seed from season to season. They're great for soups. There's just so many like fun, colorful varieties out there. Edamame, soybeans. These are, again, warm season, so you want to wait till June 1st to grow these. A lot of times you want to look for the hairless varieties if you're going to be eating them as edamame. It's just a little bit nicer mouthfeel, but they tend to be pretty easy as well. Japanese beetles can come in and they can skeletalize the leaves, but a lot of times, even when they do that, they're not impacting the yield that much, so keep that in mind. A lot of times with the Japanese beetles, I just like to go with a bucket of soapy water early in the day or late in the day when they're like the least mobile and kind of swat them into the bucket of soapy water to get rid of them. Fava beans are another one that you can grow here. And you can actually harvest the leaves of the fava beans. And it has kind of like a cross between a pea shoot and a spinach. And they can be pretty easy to grow too. They're another one that you plant early, like peas, even though they're a bean. Jicama is another one. This one needs a really, really long season to grow here. I've gotten a lot of like baby golf size ball jicamas and not too many bigger, nice jicama like you buy in the grocery store. I think they're growing those further south where they have a longer growing season. It is a vining crop. You are harvesting like the tuberous root. I've never gotten it to actually flower and produce new pods to collect seeds from, but something to try. Cover crops, alfalfa, clover, vetch, and field peas are all in this family as well. I really, really love clover. It's like one of my favorite things. White Dutch clover, I usually put it in my pathways between my beds. It helps to minimize the weeding because you can just mow the pathway. It's providing nitrogen fixation to that soil that you're walking on. You can walk on it after it's been raining and you're not going to compact your soil. And it also provides, great habitat for beneficial insects and pollinators as well. And this just gives you an idea of like what it looks like before and after mowing. A lot of times we try to like mow every other row so that we keep as much of that pollinator habitat in place. But it also looked really great right after you mowed it too. I'm just going to keep going and we'll save the rest of the questions till the end. Nightshades are next. So this is your eggplant, your ground cherries, your peppers, tomatillos, tomatoes, and potatoes. These are all heavy feeders, so again, they're going to maybe want a little bit more fertilizer and compost. They can all be mulched. These are worm season crops too, and they are susceptible to the Colorado potato beetles. Eggplant, there's all different kinds of diversity in eggplant. So if you want the big purple ones, make sure you're growing that variety of them, or if you want the long skinny, green ones, or the orange pumpkin-y ones. These are definitely ones you're going to want to transplant. They can take a little bit longer to produce fruits. And with eggplant, like eggplant is kind of like the anti-zucchini, where zucchini will like shoot up and get huge overnight. Eggplant just grows really, really slowly. So you kind of have to have a little more patience if you want big ones. They will eventually get nice and big if the variety is a nice big variety. But you have to kind of be patient and it can take a little bit longer than you expect it to. Ground cherries, these are one of my favorite crops. If you don't grow ground cherries, you should definitely try them. They are transplanted. They kind of grow in the same size and shape as like a pepper plant. My favorite thing about them is that when the fruits are ripe, they actually drop onto the ground and then you kind of get to forage around for them. They have kind of like a fruity, nutty, pineapple-y flavor to them that is just kind of divine. And they're just really fun to grow. They kind of like nature's candy. They have their own little husk paper wrapper on them, which is fun. Peppers, again, you want to make sure that like you're growing the ones that meet your needs in terms of spiciness. There's a whole, Scoville index of options in terms of like very, very hot to sweet and not hot at all. These again, you want to transplant. If you're looking for, a red pepper or a colored pepper, you have to wait longer. A lot of times they start out green and then they'll turn slowly as the season goes on into the color that they ultimately will be, if it's going to be orange or yellow or red. So keep that in mind. There's even some that like start out kind of a pale yellow and turn red, or a chocolate colored one that turns red, or I want to say there's also a purple one that changes color too. So, keep an eye out for that. That's kind of those are some fun varieties that are out there too. Tomatillos, they are, they can almost be weedy if you let them. They'll come back from the previous year's seed, but they're super easy to grow. My neighbors have a raised bed and they had tomatillos kind of growing on the edge of it that dropped into my rain garden next to it. And then the next year I had like this most abundant, prolific tomatillo crop that I never really had to do anything to but harvest it and make salsa verde with. So I think tomatillos are super easy. Again, you kind of just want to watch them. If you miss any the next year, you will have them come back from seed. And so you want to make sure to transplant those to another spot, or let them grow, but keep that in mind. They can almost be weedy. Tomatoes are my favorite. There are so much diversity of tomatoes. There's little teeny tiny ones. There's great big 3-pound ones. They kind of are divided into determinate and indeterminate types. The determinate types are going to get to be 2-3 feet tall, and then they're going to produce an abundance of flowers and fruits kind of all at the same time. Indeterminate types are going to start producing flowers and fruits, and they're going to just continue to flower and grow bigger and bigger and taller. And so they really need to be trellised. I like to actually, my favorite way to trellis them is actually to use the kind of mesh trellis and let them kind of just weave them up into that rather than using cages. I think that growing, that just is so much easier in my book. A lot of times you want to prune the base of the tomato plants to have good air circulation. So when they're a couple feet tall, I usually go through and prune the bottom 6 to 10 to 12 inches of the plant so it just has one stem growing up. There's all kinds of theories and philosophies on pruning tomatoes, but for me, like getting that good air circulation at the base of the plant really helps cut down on diseases. They can reseed from the previous year, but they're not really likely to produce too much unless we're having a really long season. Oftentimes it's better to start with new plants each year. And again, you're gonna want to transplant those because they really like the extra added boost. You'll just get fruits a lot faster that way. Potatoes, oftentimes you want to plant seed potatoes. You can, take potatoes from the grocery store if they're starting to sprout and throw those in the garden. You want to make sure that they're disease free, and sometimes that's hard to know unless you're getting them as seed potatoes. They oftentimes are going to produce better if they're hilled, so planting them at the bottom of a trench and then burying them as they get bigger a couple of times. There's a few varieties that it doesn't seem to matter. I know Yukon Golds are one that don't need to be hilled, but a lot of the like fingerling types do need to be hilled in order to produce a lot of potatoes. They're really easy to save seed from year to year. You can actually just dig up your potatoes in the fall, put them in your root cellar, and then save them for the next season. They will sprout. You can knock those sprouts off 3 or 4 times before you're going to have any detrimental effect on the next year's crop. So keep that in mind. And again, you only want to save the seed from the healthy plants, make sure you're not saving seed from diseased plants, because then that would just prolong the problems that you're having. I have one added bonus goofy nightshade that I want to throw out there. This is the Wonderberry or the Sunberry. It's a little tiny black shiny fruit. It has the flavor of melon when you eat it raw, and when you cook it, like put it in a muffin batter, it turns into blueberries. They're way more prolific than any blueberry. They're an annual here. They are super delicious, and I absolutely adore this plant. Umbels are next. So this is our carrots, celery, parsnips, fennel, and then a bunch of herbs are also in the same family. And they all have this kind of umbrella-shaped flower, which is why they're called the umbel family, or Apiaceae is the Latin name. These are all typically direct seeded. They're light feeders, and typically the root crops aren't usually mulched. Carrots, there's a lot of diversity out there in carrots. There's some fun, pink and red and purple and yellow varieties that are really delicious. I think they're really great to seed them with radishes. I like to dig the little furrow and put the carrot seeds and the radish seeds all in the same furrow. Usually by the time the radishes are ready to harvest, the carrots are maybe 2-3 inches tall, and then you've gotten like 2 crops in that same space. They can be seeded. The bottom picture there is this board that I once built to try to have even spacing and not have to thin the carrots with the radishes, but that was a lot of work. But it did work pretty well. Parsnips, they can be typically kind of slow growing. You can plant them as early as now, but typically I like to wait till around June 1st, just so that by the time you harvest them, they're not so big and woody. Because typically you want to harvest them after we've had a little bit of a frost. They just get a lot sweeter if you do that. They do have like an oil in the foliage that can burn your skin. So you want to be really careful of that and make sure you're wearing gloves when you're working around the parsnips. It's just like a nasty burn that they can do, like a wild parsnip, and the regular parsnips can do that too. Celery root, and celeriac. These typically need kind of a sandier soil. Actually, I think what they really need is a lot of water. I never give them enough water. I like to typically kind of plant things, get them established, water them enough to let them get going, and then let it rain. And they seem to just want more water than that. They're also pretty hard to get to grow compactly enough. I tend to get like rosettes of celery, which are not quite what you're expecting. But yeah, you can be successful with them, especially if you've got like a sandier soil and you want to water them a bunch. Fennel, if you're trying to grow the bulb, you want to make sure that you're growing a Florence or a bulb type. The bronze and the common types typically don't make that nice bulb. These can be direct seeded or transplanted. And I have this lovely picture of that swallowtail caterpillar there, just a reminder that all of the plants in this family are the hosts for the swallowtail caterpillar butterflies. I love those butterflies, so I always like, if those show up, it makes my day. I've never had them like decimate a crop. I've had a bunch of them on different crops, and I'd rather have the butterflies usually more than those crops. So they can have as much as they want in my garden. Parsley, cilantro, dill, these are all pretty easy to grow. Dill and cilantro, again, you want to kind of plant those multiple times throughout the season to get a good harvest of them. They will kind of bolt rather quickly. But you know, they're still, their seeds are all nice too. So, you know, letting them flower and be the habitat for those beneficial insects can be really good. So that's something to consider. Parsley is a good transplanter. Chervil, caraway, and anisole are in this family as well. And then our last group is kind of this miscellaneous families. So sweet corn, sweet potatoes, and okra. So sweet corn and popcorn, these should be pretty densely planted for cross-pollination. They can be pretty heavy feeders, so if you might want to add a little bit more fertilizer, and then both at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season, because oftentimes or before the next planting, because they can deplete the soil. And they can be susceptible to the corn borers, so you want to be careful with those. Sweet potatoes have kind of a vining habit. They are warm season. They're started from slips. You can actually make slips by letting a sweet potato sprout, and then taking little baby plants from it. They're pretty light feeders in the grand scheme of things, but they probably would benefit from just a little bit of compost as well. And then okra is the last one. So this is a warm season crop. It's usually started from transplants. It can be a heavy feeder. You want to make sure you're harvesting it when it's kind of smaller, because they can get pretty woody as they get big, and they can get big kind of more like a zucchini overnight. That like 3 to 4 inch range is much better than like 6 to 7 inch range with those. And that is the end of my presentation here. So if you have questions, feel free to add those to the chat. I just want to add that, you know, the Hort Society, we have this amazing membership opportunity for you. You get subscriptions to Northern Gardener Magazine, discounts at all of our partner businesses. There's awesome free gardening webinars like the one you're experiencing this evening. There's other additional classes and workshops and events, tickets to the Minneapolis Home and Garden Show, and then we have an awesome e-newsletter that goes out in addition to that. So now I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Courtney. We are going to answer the rest of your questions, I promise. But there are over 100 of you on this webinar, and there are a lot of questions. So thank you all for being so patient. And we know we went over, sorry, it's a lot of information. But we will get to your questions, I promise. So thank you, Courtney, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Once we're done here tonight, you're going to receive a survey. We would really appreciate it if you would complete that and provide us with your feedback. You'll also will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. I know a lot of you were asking about that. Yes, you will get a link. So on behalf of the Minnesota State Horticultural Society and Courtney, Laura, and myself, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe. And now back to the questions. Feel free to stick around for, you know, as long as you feel up to it. Okay, we're just going to go back to the beginning, and I'm just going to take the order in which they were given.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, so question number 1, can we use store-bought garlic for planting? like what you'd get in a grocery store?
I would, if I'm gonna buy garlic, if I'm gonna get garlic to plant it, I would try to go to a farmer's market or a local co-op and buy local garlic, because the garlic that's from China might not be so well adapted to our local ecosystem versus the stuff that is locally grown here is gonna be much more successful. There are garlics that are hardy here, so yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for companion planting for alliums?
I would say that alliums kind of are more a companion plant than than to other things, and they go well with a lot of things. Um, you know, you could do them with lettuces, you could do them with other root crops. Yeah, they're gonna go well with just about everything.
I will add to that that my chives seem to want to take over the neighborhood, so just, your mileage may vary.
Yep.
Next, rutabagas. Do they require a long growing season?
Yes and no. Like I would say they're probably like similar to like a regular turnip, and that they probably are, a 2 to 3 month. They're not like a 5 month thing. We actually had rutabagas last year that we we planted, and then I sort of forgot about them. And then when I came back and found them, they were like bigger than my head. And they were still good,
That's a
believe it or
lot of rutabaga.
yeah, so they will continue to grow if you forget about them. But they don't take that long. And they a lot of times people want really big rutabagas, so that's a thing. Yeah.
Sandra is having trouble finding rutabaga seed and plants. Any ideas?
I would just check garden centers. You're more likely to find seeds than you are plants with rutabaga in my experience. Yeah.
Hey. How early should you plant bok choy?
You could plant it, in the next week or two, and it would be just fine. It's in that brassica cool season crop family, so it's going to be hardier than most things.
I have a question about some confusion between marigolds and calendulas, which are also marigolds.
Hmm. I
Why
see.
I guess the question is, why are calendulas also called marigolds?
I have not experienced that. Um,
I
I
don't know
think
why.
that the calendula has like a more of a daisy-like flower. I mean, they both have the petals and the rays, composite flower type, but I've always seen them listed separately. I have not heard the calendula called a marigold or vice versa.
And we've had a few people ask this next one. Besides the brassicas, will other early crops already planted, like my lettuce, spinach, radishes, peas, also be okay with the cold snap? Do we need to cover things?
I have all of those things outside growing, and I'm not covering any of them. It doesn't, I mean, check where if you're up north, and it's going to get below 30 degrees, then yeah, I might throw a sheet over them. Here in the Twin Cities, we're looking at a low of 32 and 33. I think they'll be fine.
Okay. If I plant two different varieties of cucumbers or watermelons, will they cross-pollinate?
It depends. I would look at look up the Latin name, and if they're gonna likely have the same genus, but if the species is different, they're a lot less likely to cross-pollinate. And usually with like cucumbers and melons, they are a different genus altogether, so it seems unlikely that they would cross-pollinate. But some like squashes squashes and zucchinis are more likely to cross because they can sometimes be the same.
Okay. Does the landscaping fabric help prevent blight? Blight?
It does in that it can help keep, you know, the microbes that are in the soil from splashing up. And so it can, to a certain degree, it's not going to like eliminate any blight spores that are out there in the air, but if you have it in your soil, it can help prevent it from splashing up for sure.
Can sweet pea, the flowering plant, fix nitrogen? Is it really a pea?
I believe that yes, it really is a pea and it should be able to fix nitrogen. I'm not sure if you need to get a special inoculant for it or if just the plain garden inoculant will work, but you could definitely try it. You don't want to eat the sweet peas though. I've heard that those are not so edible.
I
Sad.
thought they were poisonous.
Yeah, I've heard that too. So I would
They're
definitely
pretty
avoid
bad.
eating those.
Yeah. Margie needs some beet help. She, like I, have a garden ruled by rabbits and was using raised beds, and she didn't really get anything. And was
Rabbits
wondering,
just
is the
annihilated
soil
them
too
all.
depleted? Was it not deep enough? Was it not loose
Oh,
enough?
I've definitely had rabbits like chew down beets to nothing. So
Mhm.
I'm trying some of that row cover, like planting them and putting that row cover over it can protect them. The row cover is awesome, a deterrent for rabbits. Rabbits aren't smart enough to go under it. In fact, I think they're deterred if it billows at all. So one of the tactics that I've had for some of these crops that are more susceptible to rabbits is actually to put some row cover up around it and have it kind of billowy around it. And that they have left those crops alone more likely than not.
Well, she got the greens just fine, but when she went to pull it up, there was nothing under the greens.
Huh. It could just be that it was too soon. You know, watching that like days to maturity and waiting that long is a good idea. Um, but yeah.
Okay. Andy wants to know, how much space do dry beans need?
They're typically a lot like regular beans, green beans, and that you probably want to plant them 12 inches apart in the garden.
Okay.
And there are like bush types and there are also vining types of those as well.
At what point in the season do you till under the white clover?
Depends. A lot of times I will leave it in place until I'm ready to switch my beds and my pathways because it is perennial, it'll come back. You know, if it's creeping into the beds a little bit, I might, you know, till that at the beginning of the season. It knocks out pretty easily with just a little bit of tillage. It doesn't take a lot to kill it. It can also like winter kill if we've had a really cold winter without a lot of snow cover. And I've had it come back just from like the seeds that were in the ground from it flowering and producing seeds in that situation too. But yeah, so you know, if before you plant it, I would say is probably the best, you know, if before you're going to plant in the springtime is the best time to till it under.
Okay. Do any vegetable plants need to be protected this week or this weekend?
I mean,
Specifically potato?
hopefully you haven't planted any nightshades out yet. Hopefully, you know, anything that's kind of more in the tender side, any warm season crops, I would definitely think about uh, definitely covering those.
So
But
potatoes
season
need
crops,
cover?
this is minimal. Yeah.
Okay. Um, could you discuss the reasoning for cutting the seed potatoes before planting?
Oh, sure. So any like a potato, anywhere where it has an eye will produce another plant. So you can, you know, plant the whole potato and just get one plant that has multiple stems, or you can cut up the seed potato into multiple chunks that each have an eye, and then you'll get multiple, you know, plants from each of those chunks. So that's the idea for cutting them up. You can't do the same thing with the sweet potato. The sweet potato, you have to like create a new plant by creating those slips. So anywhere where it sprouts, you can kind of bury that. And then if, you know, breaking off the sprout and then rooting that in some water or soil, and then planting that out, and then that'll produce more sweet potatoes.
Donna had some funny looking carrots last year and wants to know if there are any suggestions to avoid the multiple fingers.
You know, making sure that when you go to plant, I like to take a pitchfork and really aerate the soil underneath where I'm going to plant root crops like that. You want it kind of to be nice and light and fluffy to a certain degree, or at least loose. You don't want it to have, I think that the carrots, the multiple branching often comes from when they have like a little bit of compaction around their roots. So having that be looser soil is going to give you longer, straighter carrots typically. Although, you know, those fingered ones are really fun. My son only wants to eat weird looking carrots. So, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Aha! And we have an answer to the great calendula question. The English call calendula pot marigold.
Mm,
So there's marigold and then there's pot marigold.
gotcha.
Okay, now it makes
Thank
sense.
you.
I knew I had seen it somewhere. More questions about covering the potatoes. Okay. Where do you find sunberry? I wanted to ask that too. So Marjorie and I both.
Baker Creek has the seeds, so that's the seed company that has it. And I know that like Eggplant Urban Farm Supply carries Baker Creek seeds, and I believe that they earlier this spring when I was there, they had the sunberry seeds. There's also a really great seed search engine that is pickacarrot.org that you can go on there and type in whatever you're looking for, and it'll go across a database of probably hundreds of different seed companies and tell you where to find seeds too. Pickacarrot.org.
Excellent. Is it easy to grow watercress?
You know, that is one that I have not played with too much. I'm sorry, it's pickacarrot.com, not .org. Pickacarrot.com.
You haven't grown watercress.
I haven't really grown watercress.
We found one.
It sometimes would likes kind of more moist soil. But beyond that, I don't know much.
Yeah, I just know that in the wild it grows on riverbeds. So yeah, it would have to be pretty darn wet. When should I see my asparagus spears start coming up?
Any day now. I have some neighbors that have some asparagus in their yard, and I noticed that it was just starting to pop up. So any day, I would say, depending on where you are in the state and how much of an urban heat effect you have.
Sorry, too many questions. With the question about the Asian squash, they meant opo squash and bottle squash.
I have
Things
not
like
done those varieties, so I don't have much info there.
Okay. Lorene says, I'm hardening off my tomatoes and some of the leaves are turning yellow. The younger leaves are green. Should I remove the yellow leaves?
If it's the older leaves, a lot of times, yeah, the leaves at the base of the plant will actually turn yellow. That's fine. I actually like to usually like break those off before I'm planting anyway, and then dig the hole as deep as I can, and then actually bury as much of the stem up until the green leaves. Tomatoes are awesome in that they have like the stem that's covered with these little root hairs, and those as soon as those hairs get buried, they turn into roots, and so then you get a like stronger, sturdier plant with more roots if you bury part of the stem. So go for it.
Okay. Oh, okay. Jill has a good one. Last summer I grew Swiss chard and thought I had worms or beetles eating holes in them, but I finally caught the goldfinch pair eating my chard. Any suggestions?
Oh man,
I hadn't heard that before.
I haven't heard that one before either. That's kind of strange. Row cover would protect it from the goldfinches.
Yeah, that's just, I didn't see that one coming.
No,
Have you done gourd, specifically bitter gourd? Have you had any success?
I have not done those either. Man, you guys are you're stumping me, which is awesome. I have not. Yeah,
I didn't think we could. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, bitter melon, you often see it at the farmer's market. So I know you can grow it here, but I don't have a ton of experience growing it myself.
Yeah, I know the one stall that the one family I tend to buy from, they apparently it thrives because they have a lot of it. Um, are rainbow carrots distinct from regular carrots? Does it matter which variety if I want to plant them in a container?
If you're gonna plant them in a container, I would say look for the like Parisian carrots that are kind of smaller and stubbier. They're gonna just do better unless you have a really deep container. Um, I would look for like the smaller, more roundish types or the shorter ones versus the really long ones. Um, the rainbow carrots, like those are typically a special variety, or the colored carrots, they're definitely a specific variety that you're looking for. Yeah.
There are a lot of people sending in their thanks, and thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. There's a whole lot of appreciation being given. So we thank you guys very much, and you're very welcome. Um, cover crops in containers? Yes, no, maybe?
I would just add more compost. I don't know that that's necessarily I think of more cover crops as being in garden beds where it'd be easier to till them under. You could always do, if you've got an empty container towards the end of the season, putting something like a pea or buckwheat where it's gonna, winter kill easier. That one might be a good option, but containers are so easy to just, mix in a little bit more compost during the before you plant them, that might make more sense.
Is it necessary to mix the inoculum for legumes?
What the inoculant does is it really like guarantees that mycorrhizae is in the soil and there for those roots. Sometimes, if you've grown peas or beans or something in the soil year after year, that mycorrhizae might be present, but you can't really know for sure unless you add it there yourself.
Anita drops in a bit of information for us. Bitter melon does grow well here in the Twin Cities, but getting it to germinate is the toughest challenge I've had in years. Watch YouTube videos to get hints.
Sounds good.
There we go. Blueberry plants that are budding and flowering, cover or not this weekend?
I saw something from Annie Claude earlier this week about the blueberry plants, and that at this point none of them are probably flowering or to the point that we really need to worry about them. So I'm going to go with her advice and not worry about them.
Yeah, I figure if they can put up with a Minnesota winter and a Maine winter, that they're probably fine.
Yep,
That's
exactly.
Kathy wants to know if you can use, I'm going to say this wrong,
Milorgan.
Milorganite.
Yeah, no.
Milorganite in a
that.
vegetable garden.
Don't use that in your vegetable garden.
What is
Milorgan
it?
it's a fertilizer that's made from the sewage sludge in Milwaukee. It can have a lot of heavy metals in it. It's not good for vegetable gardens. Not recommended. It's fine for, like ornamentals, but you don't want to put it on vegetables.
Well, the things we learned. Okay. Will row covers allow pollinators to do their thing?
No, the row covers are going to keep pollinators out. But for the most part, like the things that you'd use row covers for, you're not necessarily going to need, like you'd use the row covers to protect like the chard or the arugula or radishes. Like those aren't things that that need to flower in order to harvest them. So that shouldn't be too much of an issue.
Okay. How far apart Should squash and zucchini be planted to avoid cross-pollination?
Ooh.
Pollination. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
That one, I'm going to direct you to the Seed Savers Exchange website to look up because I don't know that one off the top of my head. I know that we are getting ready to launch like a seed starting or seed saving endeavor through the Hort Society, and we'll actually have a webinar coming up later this summer with an expert on seed saving and doing a seed saving 101 webinar. So watch out for that and come on there and ask Zach that question. I really probably have already planted your squash and your zucchini by then, so look it up on Seed Savers website first, but make sure to tune in for that.
Okay. Christopher wants to know if asparagus can be planted in a raised garden.
You know, in a raised bed that's connected to the ground, it should be okay. The closer to the ground, the better. You don't really want those roots kind of up above the ground because they could freeze out during the winter season, so they're going to be better protected kind of at ground level. But if it's not a really big deep raised bed, they might be okay. I wouldn't do it in a container like a pot. They're never going to make it through the winter that way.
Okay, and almost last question is from Robert, who has used one of my favorite words in his question. This is how to thwart cutworms on transplants.
So there's a bunch of different things you could do. You could take like a plastic cup and like cut the top of it and cut a slit so you can kind of put it around this little seedling. That's one thing. You could try wrapping the seedling, the stem of it, with some tin foil. Those are probably the two best options that I can think of. Yeah, that can be a tricky one. You could also try the row cover. That might help as well. I think of the cutworms though as kind of like crawling from the edges, so putting some kind of ring around it to protect it is probably going to be your best bet. That's an inch or two high that is going to be hard for it to get over.
Okay. How deep with the tin foil, he says?
I would say just even a couple inches at the base of the plant is probably going to be enough. Another option would be diatomaceous earth. You could sprinkle a little bit of that around the base of the plants. That would also inhibit cutworms. Yeah.
Okay, it says thank you. Thank you everyone for sticking around. Yeah, we're gonna stop the webinar now. So thank you all very much for staying so late with us. Appreciate it. We appreciate you sticking around and answering all the questions, Courtney.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Everybody have a great night and stay safe.